Hello and welcome to the Heaven Bound Podcast. My name is Jason Harden. I'm here with Roger Schaus, and we're opening the Bible in search of fuel for your spiritual journey. This is where we talk about life the way it was meant to be and what it means to be a disciple of Jesus in the 21st century. Wherever you are, thanks for joining us on the journey today.
We are so glad to have you with us today. On Fridays this month, we're talking about the subject of change. Change is coming is what we're titled this. We look about us, we're midway through the month of February already, and we're seeing change in weather. We're switching from sports, from football to basketball, and pretty soon we'll be into baseball. And life is very fluid. Life is always changing. And so we tried to look at some concepts along that line in our first lesson in this little series. And then last time we talked about change within family. And again, family dynamics is very fluid. It's always changing. Your little ones don't stay in diapers forever, and that's a good thing. And kids grow up, and they move out, and then they meet new people, and you got more faces in your family, and then more babies being born. And so life is constantly changing like that. That's just life. And so the third aspect, which we want to talk about today, is change comes to the church. And just like that, the church is fluid in some ways, and change comes about. And again, this is something that we don't preach about as often maybe as we should, but there's some layers here that we need to look at and talk about how a church changes and what we can do to anticipate and plan and make things good for that.
Yeah, and I hope all of our listeners understand, but just for the sake of making it as explicitly clear as possible, when you're talking about change coming to a local church, we're not talking about the bricks and mortar. We're not talking about a new roof, right? We're talking about people. People, as we have already talked about in this series, change. There are times that people come and go, but people together develop a culture, right? They develop an atmosphere, and an attitude springs from that atmosphere. A mindset permeates that collective group, and that is what we need to be mindful of as we talk about change coming to churches. What is the mindset? What is the culture? How are those individual lives changing, and how are those lives together forming a trajectory? Is it going in a good, healthy, God-honoring growth sort of direction, or is it trending in a decay, a sense maybe of denial as to how serious things are going? Are we drifting in the wrong direction? And Roger, that is two words that come to my mind when I think of this, either drifting or departure, right? We might talk about the departure and how that even shows up in the New Testament in a moment. But what do you think we need to be aware of as far as the way that congregations can drift?
Well, what happens usually is we just kind of get into a status quo area, and we just kind of keep on going the way we're going. We take our foot off the attention, the vision, the purpose of what we're all about, and we just get kind of lazy. And we can do that in a lot of ways. People do that in their families. Sometimes they just get a little lazy in their finances, or they don't keep the house up, and next thing you know, the gutters are hanging down. You just haven't been keeping up with stuff. And when a church is like that, then it will start drifting. And if you've ever been in a little boat, I've been in a boat fishing before, and we weren't really paying attention, and we were drifting places we shouldn't be. And so it takes sight and someone at the helm, and it takes the idea of this is where we need to be. And this is why God has presented leaders in the congregation to keep a church where it should be. It's interesting when we open this topic up that, one of the first things that comes to my mind is Revelation 2 and Revelation 3, and particularly three churches. Ephesus had left their first love, Sardis was dead, and Laodicea was lukewarm. Now, they all change, and you can say, well, how can you say that? because you don't start a church without loving Jesus. You don't start a church being dead. If you're dead, you're not going to do anything. You don't start a church being lukewarm. It takes some ambition and some diligence to get things rolling. So all three of those churches at one time were doing what they should have been doing, but then they drifted. And they got to the state here where they were in serious, serious trouble. And that's why we see these letters written to them to wake them up. To all three, God tells them to repent because they were not where God wants them to be. So when we think about a church changing, it's not just even in the size of the memberships. A church can say, well, we used to be 200, now we're a little bit smaller than that. Sometimes that's just fluctuation with the community, with job market in the community and things like that. Get some of our rural communities, kids grow up and they don't want to be farmers, so they move where the jobs are. They go to the cities. And sometimes the congregation membership can grow or shrink in different sizes like that. But the spiritual side,
right,
the strength of the church, that can remain the same no matter what the size is. And that's something we need to focus on.
Yeah, the writer of the letter to the Hebrews even uses that word drift, right, toward the very beginning of the letter. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 1. We must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. What do we need to do in order to avoid that unhealthy drift? Well, we've got to pay attention. Right? Whether you're in a small fishing boat or you're just wading in semi-deep water on the shore of the ocean, it can be very, very easy to start in one area and not even realize that I am being moved by the waves of this ocean. Well, individual disciples can be guilty of that, can fall prey to that. And to your point from Revelation 2 and 3, entire churches can drift. And so that is definitely one way that churches can change. Roger, anything else along those lines?
Again, the culture of a congregation. Every family has a culture, every business, every organization, every church has a culture. And that culture comes from the people. So Laodicea would have been lukewarm because the members were lukewarm. Sardis was dead because the members were dead. You walk in some places and everybody stares at you as if you have walked in with three heads and like you feel like turning around. Maybe I shouldn't belong here. That's the culture of a place. You walk in and people are almost running up to you with smiles on their faces, patting you on the back. Glad to see you. You're so welcome here. How does it get that way? That is a culture there. And so a church can change its culture. It does not have to be stiff and unfriendly. It can change. Here at Charlestown Road, hardly a week goes by, if not at every single service, we say that Sunday is the best day of the week. We believe that. That has become our culture. It's in our DNA. That came about from saying that, believing that, practicing that, preaching that over and over and over again. And you have people saying that in their prayers. We have people who will say it all the time. I'm so glad it's Sunday. It shows in what they do. Our Sunday services start at 9:30. At 8 o'clock, we got people already showing up. 8:30, you got a lot of people already here, an hour before services. Why? Because it's the best day of the week. And that's a way a church can change. And so when we think about church changing, it's not always negative.
Right.
It can be positive. It can be stronger. It is a better church today than it was yesterday. And that should be the ambition and the vision and the goal of the leaders, is that here we are. This is what's been given to us. Now let's see if we can make it better. And in that process of bettering it, there's some change that takes place.
Right. So that's one aspect, right? Drifting or working to improve that culture as a whole. No doubt that is a major part of how churches change. The other word that comes to my mind that I mentioned a moment ago is just the idea of departure. And just like drift is used in Hebrews 2, departure is used in 2 Timothy 4 by the Apostle Paul when he writes to young Timothy in verse 6, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. It is not that Paul is drifting away from Jesus. It's not that he is walking away from the faith, but he realizes there is a time when he would no longer be here, right? And Roger, this departure aspect, whether it is a move or a retirement or a physical death, that also can greatly impact a local congregation.
It does, especially within the leadership. You have so many men who are serving as shepherds, and for whatever reason, one no longer is going to be there. He's been transferred, he retires and moves, or he dies. There's going to be kind of a hole there. I've seen through the years, on both a positive and a negative side, what one family coming to a congregation can do. You can have one family come in and they're just energetic and they're greeting everybody, and there's just, it's just like a little light bulb, and everybody just feels the warmth. You get another one family comes in and everything is wrong, and they're complaining and griping. They're never happy, never content. And pretty soon there just seems like there's a cloud in the congregation there. There's a cloud over that auditorium, and everyone starts complaining because this one family does. So when we think about the personnel, the people, the membership, that's fluid. It's going to change. You're going to have little ones growing up, and they're going to be obeying the gospel. You're going to have people being married, and that's going to bring people into the congregation. You're going to have the older ones who are going to be passing on to the next room in God's house. That brings changes. Some of our listeners may not know this, but I've already told the congregation here that I'm planning to retire this summer. And so I will be moving on. And Lord willing, there'll be someone else in my chair. And Jason will continue on these wonderful podcasts and teaching you these things. But why do that? Because it's necessary. It's time. And it's good to do that. And so again, within a congregation that happens. So that teaches us, and that reminds us, that as a church, we don't live or die because of one person. Our faith is in Jesus. Somebody comes in among us, that's wonderful. Somebody leaves. Well, we hate to see him go, but you know what? We continue on. We don't collapse because of one person. The kingdom is larger than one person. And we particularly see that early in the book of Acts. We've got Peter who's in jail. Soon after that, we see the first apostle, James, after giving the commission of Jesus. He's put to death by the Roman officials there. He's killed by a sword. But you know what? The kingdom went on. Stephen was preaching, and Stephen was killed, but the kingdom went on. The kingdom is bigger than any one of us. And sometimes we preachers don't think that. We think that everything surrounds us, but it doesn't. It doesn't. We serve a moment in time, and the kingdom will go onward with us. And so that's part of the change that a church needs to see. Just as a family prepares to be empty nesters, the kids aren't going to be around there all the time now. A family prepares for that. A church prepares for that. And that's some of the change that goes through this.
Yeah, a lot of that revolves around teaching, right? It reminds me of how the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 20, as he reflects on the change in his own life and the impact of that change on the church in Ephesus. You brought them up earlier from Revelation 2. There's that classic scene in Acts chapter 20 where Paul tells those elders from Ephesus, we very well may not cross paths again, but I want you to remember how day and night, for years, I have shared the good news of Jesus with you. I have unashamedly proclaim to you the whole counsel of God. You cannot afford to get serious about that when change is already, the gears are already turning, right? We talked about last Friday in our episode, changes coming to our families. You can't wait until your children are 17 and a half and applying to colleges to get serious about grounding them in the faith, right? Same sort of of thing here. As we experience changes in teachers and preachers and deacons and shepherds and pillars, men and women who have been like pillars in the life of a local church, you can't wait to get serious about teaching the whole counsel of God when you're in the middle of that change. In order to be well prepared for it, there has to be sound, healthy, serious teaching that equips along the way.
And when we think about the leadership in the congregation, we think about shepherds, deacons, and preachers. That begins with teaching young men when they're in middle school and high school to start planting that idea in their minds so they will make the right choices that will help them down the road. I mentioned recently in the sermon, just in the 18 years I've been here, there's been a lot of movement in this eldership, a lot of changes. We've had some deaths, we've had some people move away, but this congregation continues to have an eldership. I think that's a tribute to this idea of a legacy. Every congregation needs to ask those questions. Who's going to be the next shepherds in this church? Who's going to be the next deacons in this church? And so you don't wait until there's a crisis. What you do is you start teaching and preaching and equipping men, getting things ready. And so 5 years out, 8 years out, the steps are being taken. They're being mentored. They're being taught. And so when the time is ready, these men are ready, then it's just an easy fit, and it goes that way. And that again comes about as you understand change is going to happen. And we have to learn to prepare and develop for that.
Yeah, I think that is such a biblical idea that if we will think in those terms, we begin to see it all over the Old and New Testaments, right? Moses with Joshua. You've got Jesus, of course, with the apostles. We mentioned Paul and Timothy, or Paul and Titus earlier. You see this over and over and over again. Roger, I'll ask you in a moment why you think we don't see this more, perhaps among disciples of Jesus. Why isn't this pipeline of development taken a little more seriously? For my part, I'll throw out one answer. I'm afraid that pride gets in the way of a lot of this, where built into the idea of a developmental pipeline is a humble awareness that baton is eventually going to get handed off. I can only run with this baton so long. There are a lot of men and women who don't like that idea, right? I've been teaching this age group, this class in this room for decades, and nobody else is going to teach this class. Well, that is not a healthy, that is not a biblical, that's not a Christ-like attitude, right? Built into the DNA of the church ought to be the older mentoring the younger. Because however excited or devoted I am to teach or preach or shepherd or whatever it is, I can only do this for so long. And so pride cannot afford to get in the way. What else goes to your mind?
Well, I think the reason this doesn't happen is we just don't see the need. We've got elders now, and so that's fine. And we've got somebody serving as deacons, that's fine. We got preachers, that's fine. And so we just go on our way thinking, well, there's just not a need. But we don't see beyond the present. And so we got passages like the book of Titus, chapter 2, where it talks about older men and how they're to be, and older women are to teach younger women, and urge the young men to be sensible. We see that pipeline being developed there, and the idea that who's going to carry this on? Who's going to carry us on? And if we don't generate the interest now, then it probably won't be there. And again, many congregations, and I go over the country doing a lot of leadership stuff like this. A lot of congregations, the way they operate until there is a crisis. An elder dies, and now we're not going to have an eldership. So we hurry up, we put somebody in, and we breathe a sigh of relief, and we don't think about it again until the next crisis. Well, that's number one, not a healthy way to live. And it's not really a biblical pattern, because we're not developing people. And whether a man ever serves as an elder or deacon or preacher, if he's developing spiritually, it's going to improve the congregation. It's going to improve his community relations and his family. So that idea that we should always try to get us to grow in grace and knowledge, as Peter ends his letter, reminds us that that's something that should be at the forefront of our thinking, and something that's so important to consider who's next. The Lord asks in the book of Ezekiel, who's going to stand in the gap? And no one could be found. No one could be found. And again, that's a sad commentary. And so, we can do better than that. And so we realize change is coming. What am I going to do about it? Well, it starts with me. What am I doing? What, am I putting myself out there that, hey, you can count on me. I will be dependable. I'm going to be the best I can. Maybe I'm not qualified to be an elder, but you know what? I will serve any way I can serve. Maybe teaching's not my cup of tea, but I can serve in another way. I can be helpful. I can drive people to the doctor. I can do something. And when we get people involved and busy and active in the kingdom, that's how development and growth takes place.
Yeah. Change is coming. Life is all about change. That was our topic 2 weeks ago. We are 3 episodes into this little 4-part series. Last Friday, change in our families. There's no doubt in my mind that our listeners know people who would be benefited by this conversation, and so we certainly encourage you to share this far and wide. Roger, there's no doubt in my mind that someone who was listening to this episode had to rewind. Maybe they were driving down the road, or they're on an exercise bike, and they suddenly stopped in their tracks and thought, did I just hear what I thought I heard? We love and appreciate you, and of course are looking forward to many, many, many more episodes. But Roger has let our church family here know, and of course news has slowly begun to spread about change coming up, Lord willing, in his life, and we're excited for that. And I just so appreciate the heart that you have always brought to this. Your passion for the development of other people, of course, your passion for the Lord's church and the kingdom, and a humble awareness that this is much bigger than you, much bigger than me. Both of us put together, all of us put together. This is a kingdom project, but I so appreciate the heart that you continue to bring to that. And we've got more episodes to come. And so our listeners, Lord willing, can continue to rest easy. But for now, I appreciate you joining me in the studio, and we truly do appreciate all of you for listening to the Heaven Bound podcast. We hope the first 3 parts of this series have helped you set your mind on things above and given you a little more fuel for the journey. Lord willing, next Friday we'll wrap this series up. In the meantime, always remember, when you're walking with Jesus, you're heaven bound, and the best is yet to come.